Now we're going to read what the courts have to say about these things called Admiralty. Let's see here. I'll start with my book. The Supreme Court said that Admiralty, from the highest antiquity, so as far back as you can think of, has exercised a very extensive criminal jurisdiction. So you can commit what they call a crime and be subject to criminal jurisdiction in America. All right. All right. They say Admiralty courts exercise a jurisdiction over all maritime contracts. They say their jurisdiction as original maritime jurisdiction is in all seizures for the contravention of revenue laws. Uh-oh. So there's only one type of court that can hear revenue issues. What type of court is that? They say there's only one type of court that can deal with seizures. Seizures, like not seizures, but seizure, like if I seize your bank account or if I seize and tow your car. There's only one type of court that can hear that. What type of court is it? There's only the same. The answer is the same every question I ask. There's only one type of court that can hear it. The answer is the same every time. Every different question, there's only one type of court, right? So they say their jurisdiction is over all seizures and over all revenue. Okay, well, there's only one type of court that can hear those things. Why? Because these are private matters. These are not things related to law. These are things related to international, foreign relations. All right? That's the United States Supreme Court. That's the United States Supreme Court. Okay, here we go. This is my favorite one. They said, this is water, by the way, for anybody who... they say this power of Admiralty is extensive upon land as upon water. They said the Constitution makes no distinction in that respect. They say this Admiralty thing works in Idaho the same way it works in Miami, the same way it works in California or Fresno or San Diego, or if you go up northeast, the same way it works in Maine or New York or Boston Harbor. They say this Admiralty thing works in the middle of Oklahoma. They said this power is extensive upon land as upon water. They said the Constitution makes no distinction in that respect. They say this Admiralty jurisdiction is in matters of contract, which the courts of the United States, which are federal courts, may lawfully exercise. They say they exercise this thing to contracts that are on land. They say this Admiralty thing may also embrace this thing called vehicles and persons. They say it would be in the power of Congress. Why? Because Congress says they have the power to regulate commerce. Okay, well, there's only one type of court that can hear issues of commerce. They say it would be within the power of Congress to confer Admiralty jurisdiction upon its courts over cars engaged in transporting passengers or merchandise. Oh, there goes that word mer again. They say this thing called Admiralty denies the parties a trial by jury. It's raining. Sorry. It's raining where I'm at, I think. Or the wind. It doesn't matter. But they say this thing called Admiralty denies people a trial by jury. That's very important. There's only one thing in the United States Constitution that can deny you a trial by jury, and that is an Admiralty court. How do you know if you're in an Admiralty court or not? Well, is the jury there? Because the jury is supposed to be the judges of the law and the facts. I got a million Supreme Court cases that say it. from every state, the jury are the judges. So if you end up in front of a guy in a black robe, well, there's only one type of court that can be. And that's an admiralty court. Even if they don't call it admiralty. All right, what they say, you can be in there over the issue of vehicles. Okay, well, if you're in there over the issue of vehicles, okay, well, guess what kind of court that is? Right? They say this admiralty court denies the parties a trial by jury. They say they got these things called informations that are filed in the court for forfeiture, seizures of property, breach of revenue laws, navigation and trade and impost. And they say they got a little thing called Admiralty/Commerce. All right, let me see what else. I'm not going to read all this, but for those who don't know, I'm reading this book, by the way. I have the digital version of this book. I'm reading this book. I'm just reading the digital version of this book. This is almost 300 pages of verifiable information about understanding the courts. This is my book. I created it. The United States Supreme Court says this admiralty thing is extensive upon land as it is upon water. So anytime somebody tells you, oh, they only do admiralty upon water, they lying straight to your face. Why? Because they know we don't know better. All right. They say the United States Supreme Court said proceedings and causes of equity and of admiralty and maritime jurisdiction are according to the course of civil law. Right? I'll get into that real quick. They say admiralty acts only in rem. I'm going to get into that. In rem. And no person can be subject to that jurisdiction but by his consent on a contract. All right, let's see here. All right, this is the United States Supreme Court. They said it is well known that in civil cases of courts of equity and admiralty, juries do not intervene. That's the number one thing you need to know about an admiralty court is you do not get a jury. Why? The jury is the law of the land. The jury is of the common law of England. All right, so anything outside of the common law of England would be by nature international law. Right? They don't say international law in the Constitution. What do they say? They say commerce. They say admiralty and maritime jurisdiction or treaties. Okay, well, there's only one type of court that can hear those issues, and that's an admiralty court, right? So they say it is well known. They say we should have known this. Courts of admiralty and equity, juries do not intervene. This is the number one thing they complained about in the Declaration of Independence. And the year before the Declaration of Independence. And the year before the Declaration of Independence. They said that's the number one thing we are strapping up and dropping bodies about. Is that they are not giving us a trial by jury. All right. So how do you know you're in an admiralty court? You're going before a guy in a black robe to hear the whole cause. He's supposed to be officiating the tribunal, the ceremony. But his job is to get you to the jury because the jury are the judges. And I got a million cases. I'm not going to go into it right now. But there's a million cases that say the jury are the judges of the law. For instance, I know the Constitution of Indiana and the Constitution of Illinois says that. And then the federal Constitution says that the trial of all crimes shall be by jury. That's a command. That's not a suggestion. You can't waive it. The Supreme Court of New York said it couldn't be waived. All right, so they say the protections of the Constitution can take effect only by the common law. They say you want the protections of the Constitution, you got to go do that common law stuff. They said the laws and practices of the states cannot be referred to in reference to maritime or admiralty. They said because no equity existed in the states. They said maritime law is too imperfect and unsettled to furnish any basis for the Department of Law of the states. All right, let me see here. I don't want to go. I'm not going to read all of this. I'm going to read like 2 more cases, then I'll keep going. They say, I'm going to read this one. In Admiralty proceedings, the nature of an information, the information would be the complaint. They call it a libel or they call it an information, does not require all of the precision of an indictment at common law. Why? At common law, you got to have an injured party. You got to follow due process. You can't just be, the government just can't go after people. That's the common law of England, which is the law of the states. They say in Admiralty, oh, it's based on international law. We don't do that common law stuff. How many times you done heard that? Oh yeah, that common law, that was old Britain. They don't do that no more. That's because they lying to us. But Admiralty, the nature of an information does not require all of the precision of an indictment at common law. Why? Because at common law, it requires precision. Somebody said, wow, no equity exists in the state. No. Equity is an international term. I'm gonna that's gonna be another that'll be another live stream. Tonight is just on Admiralty. Like yesterday was just on commerce. I'm gonna make a whole live stream about Admiralty. Admiralty is a total scam. Everybody who's talking about Admiralty, I bet 1,000 Federal Reserve notes they're fed. Because that's not the common law. That's not what the states are founded upon. And only one thing can take a jury away from you, that is equity and admiralty. And then I'm actually gonna read you some stuff later that say equity and admiralty are the same thing. So it's all, yeah, that's another day. That's another day. That makes me mad more than anything. All right, because people have no clue what equity is. There I go, get mad. Let me stop. In admiralty, the nature of an information does not require all of the precision of an indictment at common law. This is the United States Supreme Court. All right, because at common law, you got to scrutinize. You can't just be taking stuff from people. You can't just be putting people in prison over fake claims from the government, which require no injured party. Okay, that's very important. The Supreme Court of Texas said the common law we have adopted in this state. In the same case, they say this common law is the opposite of the civil law rule. What is the civil law? That is the Roman law. I'm going to get into it in a second. The civil law is the Roman law. And under Roman law, you got admiralty, equity, commercial law, corporation, business law. All of that stuff comes from Rome. All right. So the Supreme Court of Texas said the common law is the rule of decision in Texas. We adopted this in this state, and the opposite is the civil law. So what's the opposite of the common law? Or what's the opposite of the Roman law? The opposite of the Roman law is the common law of England, as it relates to Texas. Because Texas is its own nation, right? Just like Idaho is its own nation, just like New York is its own nation, just like California is its own nation. So if there was no other states, Texas said, well, our law is the common law of England. All right, here we go. I read this a couple nights ago. Thomas Jefferson said in 1775 that statutes have been passed for extending the courts of admiralty, the jurisdiction of the courts of admiralty, beyond their ancient limits. What were their ancient limits? We talked about it. Commerce. Yep. Commerce, the Phoenicians, the Canaanites, the Phoenicians, the merchants. That's their ancient limits. All right. Thomas Jefferson said, that statutes have been passed for extending the jurisdiction of the courts of admiralty beyond their ancient limits, for depriving us of the accustomed and inestimable privilege of a trial by jury. There's only one thing that can deprive you of a trial by jury in this country, and that is admiralty courts. All right. Let's see. There was one more thing I wanted to read. Boom. This is the United States Supreme Court. They said next to revenue, the jurisdiction of the Admiralty are our greatest grievance. They said the courts of Admiralty seem to be forming to overturn our Constitution and to deprive us of our best inheritance, the laws of the land. They said this thing called revenue, which is under, they said that's a huge grievance. And then they said next to that, next to taxes, the jurisdiction of Admiralty is our greatest grievance. They said that's the number one thing that is forming to overturn our Constitution and to deprive us of our best inheritance, the laws of the land. What's the laws of the land? The common law of England.